name is Yvette Valdez, and I have the pleasure today of chatting with Commissioner Kristin Johnson. Commissioner Johnson has a long list of accolades and accomplishments, which would fill the hour, but alas, I will elaborate just a little. Commissioner Johnson has served as tenured professor at Emory University School of Law and also held a named professorship and served as Associate Dean for Faculty Research at Tulane. During her legal academic career, she was deeply committed to exploring emerging technologies in financial markets. Prior to her legal career, she was also an analyst at a bank, and in her spare time is the co-author of 2 forthcoming books on AI. She is a force of thought leadership and intellectual curiosity, challenging and validating our financial market systems of governance, risk, and resilience against the backdrop of regulation. She brought to bear this curiosity and leadership to the Commission at a critical time when emerging technologies are pushing boundaries of regulation. Commissioner Johnson, whom I also have the privilege of calling a dear friend, is here today to share with us her thoughts on how far we've come and where we're going. I want to start off a little bit about you, though. Walk us through a little bit about how Professor Johnson became Commissioner Johnson.
Oh, wow. So first, let me just say thanks to Sandra, to GBBC, for inviting me to join you today, and for their grace and patience as I attempted to make Herculean efforts to overcome the road closures that were preventing me from getting from Georgetown in the West End to you guys here. I also want to acknowledge the historic space in which we sit, and the critical role that physical spaces and thought leadership have played in Washington, D.C. over the history of our nation. I feel very much privileged to have the opportunity to be a public servant. I believe it is a very high calling, and becoming a law professor, I thought, might have been a highest kind of calling, but I would say that this role and this kind of service in honor of what I believe our nation has done for me and for so many, really will serve as one of the highest watermarks in my career. So I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to serve. How I came to serve is a really interesting question that really is deeply centered, I think, in 2 things: swaps, which is interesting, and then cryptocurrency, which I think is also interesting. And as an academic, almost all of the work that I did, research and writing, focused on issues that relate to these types of innovative financial products. When market participants come up with ideas for how to generate alpha, or simply to create faster, more efficient, more accurate mechanisms to execute transactions, the work that they undertake is paralleled by work that is undertaken by agencies like the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. They set out an intellectual goal, and then we all strive together to create an environment where it is possible to successfully execute on that goal, capturing all the positive benefits and mitigating all the risks. So that, in a nutshell, is what I've done as an academic. And I think there was some appeal at the time that I was nominated by the White House for someone who could think carefully about that goal. How do we ensure the best possible outcomes for our markets while thinking carefully about how to innovate and move our markets forward continuously? So this was something that was rooted deeply in the work I had been doing. I had started to write about secondary market trading for cryptocurrencies in an hour when most people were still focused on initial coin offerings and the earliest steps and stages of distributing tokenized assets. I think what I'd share now is I've learned a ton in the time that I've been in my role as a regulator. In fact, I would say that I've gone from teacher to learner in many respects, because listening into the industry has provided a pathway for me to learn and grow and understand things that were not immediately apparent based on my own previous experience on Wall Street as in-house counsel, as an analyst for a large investment bank, or even as a lawyer working on mergers and acquisitions, public and private offerings, and any number of different types of financial transactions. There was still a learning curve, there still is a learning curve in the service that I've been able to undertake. So I'll be forever grateful that the White House and Congress had confidence that I could add value to how the Commission operates today and what the world of financial markets might look like tomorrow.
Let's dig in a little bit on that value, because I think you certainly joined the Commission and rolled your sleeves. You are deeply committed to advancing the Commission's understanding of AI and AI use cases. You helped develop the Commission's first AI request for comment and have worked with market regulators globally on novel technologies and their impact on market structures. What lessons have you learned about pursuing this challenging agenda from a policy perspective?
So this is a great question that prompts me to think back to speaking with GBBC in Davos. I don't know how many of you joining us today were present in January for the intimate space that Sandra cultivated to have deep and thoughtful conversations about challenging issues in our area. And at the conversation in Davos, I raised and highlighted issues that I've been advocating for the Commission to take on over the last several years. One of them is thinking critically about artificial intelligence and how we integrate AI in our markets. So if you're familiar at all with financial markets, or at this point in time, any element of how our world economy, sector by sector, or healthcare sector, energy sector operate, AI is increasingly at the core of what research and development is doing and where investments for research and development are going. In the remarks I shared in Davos, one of the things I pointed out, because at the time the real focus was generative AI, was the potential for AI to do more in the context of financial markets than it's ever done before. So when I look back in financial markets, Yvette, and I think about what we've seen AI do, I would share with you that for decades, and you know this very well from the clients that you support and help facilitate the execution of the activities and products they launch, the activities they undertake and products they launch. We use AI to enable prediction-related or predictive-related market technologies. This enables greater price discovery, more efficient and accurate assessment and understanding of discussions and trends in financial markets, just as it does in the context of diagnosing disease in healthcare markets, and in the healthcare sector, and in many other areas of our economy and our society. But increasingly, the introduction of generative AI, and even more recently, agentic AI, pushes the envelope for what we could potentially do with AI in our markets. One of the things I've advocated for is for the Commission, the CFTC, to be allocated greater resources to enable the Commission to integrate AI into our supervisory work. Part of what we do at the Commission is to ensure the integrity of market pricing by carefully monitoring transactions all around the world to ensure that our surveillance will reveal any efforts to engage in fraud or market manipulation. It's part of the core mission that we've undertaken at the CFTC, and we've used AI to execute on this mission for many years. But newer iterations of AI are making it all the more possible, even more feasible, for us to identify and spot bad actors who are engaged in conduct that would undermine price integrity in our markets. This is a simple illustration of something I would describe as supervisory technology. And this subtech or regtech approach could be really valuable for us going forward. We also acknowledge it might be really important for market participants as well, as they begin to build out and develop the platforms that they'll use to service customers around the world, or face interesting new environments like 24/7 trading and all types of issues that I think we are in the immediate moment navigating at the CFTC.
I think we truly are navigating, but I think from a market perspective, the change of the administration, we've really seen this shifting tide where we have welcome statements, interpretive guidance to the digital assets industry, distributed ledger technology, and frankly, it's music to our ears. After being boxed out, we now really have an open door policy where market participants can come in to collaborate with the regulators. But you yourself have called for regulator collaboration with market participants time and time again. Do you see this as a positive shift in the Commission's agenda? And what concerns, if any, do you have regarding the Commission's embrace of the market? Or rather, what are potentially the headline red flags we now need to keep in mind, given that we are trying to charge forward?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, Yvette, but I would push back a little bit on sort of the historical narrative, and I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. I mentioned swaps, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, as a derivatives financial product, and cryptocurrency or digital assets. And what I'd highlight about the former category, swaps, is that when this financial product was introduced into financial markets, it was introduced by market participants and in a space where they were innovating and creating without a lot of direct regulatory oversight. Over time, Congress concluded that it was better for a federal regulatory agency to establish a regulatory framework that would enable a market structure that would ensure the integrity of that market. I think the success of standing up market infrastructure regulatory oversight in the swaps market is a fantastic story that includes curious characters, as financial markets regulation and the history of financial markets development always does, really curious and fun. I'm nerdy enough in this space that I would nerd out on this all day, but I'll say really quickly that apart from the individuals, there were also institutional commitments. And that's what I think, if I'm thoughtful about your audience, that I really want to advocate for. Those institutional commitments were in part driven by federal agencies, but they were also driven by the industry. So let me give you an example of each. In the context of regulatory agencies encouraging and inspiring discussion, I participated as a very green newbie law professor in an SEC CFTC roundtable about organizing regulation for over-the-counter swaps markets. And the SEC and CFTC did many of these. And the attendees for these events, as we were thinking about what are the right rules of the road, the attendees were market participants. They were experts. They included folks who were directly engaged in the distribution and development of financial products, as well as academics, public interest advocates, and other regulators. And so my suggestion is that we have the institutional capacity or capability immediately to engage in regulatory collaboration, and a regulatory collaboration that invites dialogue with diverse stakeholders from all corners of our markets and all corners of our community. That's my first example. Second example is industry-based. So Sandra won't beat me up later because I've already said this before. I'm going to charge you, everyone in this audience, with thinking about how you, if you're part of the private sector and not part of government service, can help to facilitate the development of an organized, thoughtful conversation about rules of the road. I think that so much of what has come in financial markets in terms of great regulation really has begun with market participants sitting down, even though they're in competition with one another, and engaging in this Rawlsian veil of ignorance kind of conversation, which is to say, if everybody on your platform is defaulting, if your platform is experiencing a run, how do we, as a community, shore up the integrity of the entire market? It's something that we can't accomplish good regulation without, to be quite honest. So I continuously advocate both for regulators to be engaged in discussion to create harmonized, efficient, effective regulatory oversight, but also for market participants to stand shoulder to shoulder, even with the person you're most engaged in competition with, and say, if the bottom falls out, how do we shore up the market for everyone?
I think the swaps market is a really good template and a really good analogy, being also the derivatives regulatory lawyer on the floor here.
Well, I'll only echo that as a derivatives regulator.
We started trading swaps on napkins in the 80s.
That's right.
The swap dealers came together to form ISDA and created market frameworks on contract trading. And then we had Dodd-Frank Title VII in 2010.
That's right.
So in the same vein, what tips would you give to the next commissioner who will need to continue to address the implications of AI, the quickly developing emerging technologies, crypto, in the pursuit of protecting resilience and market integrity?
Thanks for that question, Yvette, because here I think there's something else that will strike a chord with many of you. When we think about resilience in markets, part of the way we get there is identifying risks. One of the risks I might suggest threatens almost every business in our communities is cyber threats. So over the last several years, one of the issues that I've regularly raised, because I think it's bipartisan, I think it's technology agnostic, I think it's just a reality of the digital age in which we live, is the potential for cyber threats to disrupt businesses, to disrupt the operation of institutions across our economy and our society. And so to that end, I have taken up the sword in a couple of contexts. Very recently in time, last week or the week before, I was in Dallas and visited with the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, the Federal Reserve Branch Bank of Dallas. I sat with the bank president and CEO, Lori Logan. I've spent a lot of time in the context of my service as a commissioner engaged with different regulators in the United States and abroad on a variety of issues, but cyber risk and cyber resilience is one that has uniformly and universally been at the center of the regulatory agenda for almost everyone. What's also great is we're not in this alone as regulators, because as much as we want to shore up cyber resilience for everyone, we know that there's a commitment from each business that's serious or each institutional player that is attempting to become a critical part of the infrastructure for digital assets markets or traditional finance markets. Cyber threats are top of mind and at the center of their agenda. So I've been inviting DeFi market participants who face really interesting challenges with respect to cyber, and who've also launched some really interesting working groups and collaborative initiatives to begin to think critically about how to address cyber threats that might impose themselves in the community in ways that are distinct because of how the community is created, managed, governed, and run. We're also talking to every form of platform that might be engaged in the tokenization of assets, some type of payment system, or any form of distribution of assets about these same issues, because no one is safe. And we could point to Bybit or other examples that really illustrate the potential vulnerabilities that many businesses are facing and will face in the cyber resilience space. In traditional financial markets, we actually had a pretty awful cyber event, January of 2023, that deeply impacted the derivatives markets, which, for those of you who are familiar, we're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars of derivatives contracts globally being impacted in terms of pricing, in terms of settlement, because of a disruption related to a third-party service provider, not a registrant that we oversee, but a technology-based firm that facilitates the clearing and settlement of derivatives transactions. The instant that event took place, I advocated for the commission to take up, and then when the commission would not, I took it up myself, organizing formally a quasi-hearing, if you will, to have the president of NFA, the National Futures Association, the president and CEO of the Futures Industry Association, as well as members of the international regulatory community, the SEC, DOJ, and others, come together to have a conversation about how we shore up resilience in our markets. I think on the cyber threats issue, this is something almost no one can afford to ignore. And I think that there is just cause to think about common ground, finding a pathway to supervisory oversight that really enables and supports enterprise risk management, cyber resilience efforts and initiatives by every firm and institution in our country. Yesterday, I gave a talk at a conference for chief information security officers and chief technology officers. So the CISOs and CTOs in the room, who were from all over the country and included the largest technology firms, Microsoft, AWS, Google, we sat and talked about the protection of data and the security of data and the integrity of data, because this is increasingly going to be a foundational question for so many businesses without regard to asset class, without regard to, is this a security or is this a commodity? Did it pass the Howey test? All irrelevant, because once we get to cyber threats, we are equal in our vulnerabilities. We are equal in our need to find effective defenses. So I believe this is one of the kinds of issues that the Commission should take up, that every administration, recent past and going forward, should have at the center and the core of their agenda for securing up the national security, the security of our nation in terms of national security, but also the security of critical infrastructure. I'll stop there because I think we're out of time.
We are out of time, so you're saved on the harder question.
Oh, that's great.
But let's give Commissioner Johnson a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Guys, thanks so much.
Thank you for the remarks.